At dusk, there came a turning. There was a moment when all was known. You could feel beauty rising on the breeze, the shapes, the stone, and I would ride.
So there's, okay, we got planting, a good garden, lots of little areas, spectacular, because that allows for them to hop from place to place. Now, interestingly enough, you see a big clover field with the glorious red clovers, and we all think, oh, that's great. And interestingly, when you see the jars of honey, oftentimes you'll see an image of red clover. Funny thing is that clover has such a deep flower that the honeybee really can't access the nectar of it. So it's the ground cover clovers that the bees really go to. And anyone who's got the white clover growing in their yard, which most of us have here in Vermont, will see that when it's in full bloom. If you have honeybees nearby, they'll be out there. I would encourage anybody who's out in the yard, when you see honeybees, to thank them, because what does it hurt to let them know that, hey, we're here, we're supporting you, we'd like to see more of you. And one of the other reasons I got into beekeeping was, about 15 years ago, I walked through a field of dandelions in spring, and we're talking 30 or 40 acres of dandelions. I didn't see a single honeybee. A few bumblebees, but there was not a single honeybee, and that's when I woke up to this and said, okay, I'm going to do something. It took me a few years to overcome that fear, but that's what we can do. So once upon a time, when I first became a beekeeper, I encouraged everybody to be a beekeeper. I said, this is going to be, that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to tell everybody about beekeeping and why they should do it and how they should do it. And then I found myself with the realities of beekeeping, which is if you want to keep bees, you can dig a hole in the yard and put some money in it and just light it on fire. And then as it starts to die out, just throw more money on top of it. And that it's a very similar hobby. But I do highly encourage, if you have the ability to do it, to give it a try, or to find somebody like me who's got hives that can take you in, so you can actually see what's inside, because it is an amazing world that these creatures inhabit, and it's just to hold that comb up on a sunny day and to see the pattern of the eggs as they're laid is one of the most amazing things. To watch how they interact with each other and almost completely unaware in a happy hive. Happy hives are important. To watch how they interact with each other and even with you as the beekeeper is spectacular. However, if it's an unhappy hive, there's other precautions that I recommend taking. So I'll tell one of those stories, one of my favorite stories about learning the hard way, because that's what I do. I found that making mistakes is the best way for bees to teach you that you were wrong. They're not shy at all about letting you know that you've made a mistake. So it was my very first year beekeeping, and I got a call about a swarm. And I said, oh, this is great. I know all about swarms. I've done all the reading. I've watched the YouTube videos. I'm good to go. And so I got to the swarm, and it was about 12 feet up in a tree. And but it was on a big branch like this. It wasn't on one of those little branches that they show in all the videos where you just cut the branch into. So I went up, and I said, okay, but everybody says that swarms are super docile. So I'm just going to brush that swarm into this bucket. And then I'm going to take the bucket and dump it into the bee box. So I went up on the tree, and I got my suit, and I got up on the ladder, and I put all the bees into the bucket, and I came down, and by the time I put them in the box, I looked up, and most of them had already flown back up to the tree. So that's not how it works in the videos. So I went back up on the tree, and I was a little more assertive with the brushing, trying to make sure I got all of the bees into the bucket. And I got them down, and I did get them all into the bucket. Well, except when I looked down, I realized that my feet were kind of heavy, and I was covered with bees from like here down, and but they weren't stinging me. And like, wow, this is, I don't remember this in the book either. Like, what do you do when your feet are covered in bees? And I started thinking about it. Did I tape my ankles? I don't remember taping. Ow! And see, there's an interesting thing that happens when there's a whole lot of bees on your feet. When the first one stings, it releases a pheromone that tells the rest of them, hey, it'd be a really good idea to sting right now. And I got a lot of stings over a very short period of time. And I got the bees off, and I left my boots on. And I kept them nice and tightly laced. And got the bees in the box, and everything was good to go. We transported the bees, and we got them set up in the bee yard. And my buddy would give me the call, and went along for the ride. And I said, okay, well, I'm not feeling so good, so I'm going to go home now. Brad, is that okay with you? He said, yeah. And I said, all right, so you're good, I'm good, all right. And I got home, and I took my boots off, and both of my ankles went poof. I didn't walk for about 36 hours, so they teach really good lessons that stick with you for a lifetime. But that was the worst I've ever been stung as a beekeeper. And I survived. I'm here to tell you about it. One other story that I love to share was a few years ago I had a hive that I had two very, very weak hives that were not thriving. So I combined them. Both of the queens had died, and so they were unhappy, angry hives. And I put them together and raised a queen for that hive. Put that queen in, and when you do, you put her initially in what's called a queen cage. It's a small box, and you put about 5 attendant bees in it, and they feed her and take care of her. But you give her time to spread her pheromones throughout the hive, because that's how the bees will accept it. If you release her too quickly, there's a good chance that the bees will reject her or kill her. So I left her, and there's a candy plug that over the course of days that bees will eat through and release her once they're ready to accept her. And I left, I had to go away for the weekend. I came back, and I had requeened a few hives, and I went in, and each one, they were all happy. They were happy with their new queen, and I opened this one hive. And those sounds I told you about, there was like the happy sound and the angry sound. When this hive, I opened it up and I heard a sound that I'd never heard before. And it wasn't happy, and it wasn't angry. It was, for lack of a better term, it was fretting. And it was like this, like, kind of high, but it actually, to me, felt like the sound that I would think of worry. And it didn't register first. What could be going on in here? So I reached in and I pulled the cage out, expecting to see the queen had been released. But she hadn't. And of the 5 attendants that had been in the cage with her, 4 of them had died. And the plug hadn't gotten eaten. And I said, what do I do with this? Well, I'm gonna give it a try. I hope they accept her. And I popped open the cage, and she immediately went in the hive, and the most amazing thing happened in that moment. As she went down into the hive, it was almost instantaneous. This sound started right around her, and it shifted from that to and I realized I had been present at a coronation. I get goosebumps just thinking about it. It was one of the neatest sounds, and that hive actually was one of the strongest for many years that I ever had. So we never really know what we're doing right and what we're doing wrong. We just keep trying, and that's essentially what I'm encouraging everyone to do, is to not give up hope on anything, to do all the little things you can in your gardens, to create, habitat for all the pollinators. And that means so plant, not just for the honeybees, but also for the bumblebees and for the hummingbirds. And unfortunately, when you do that, you're also going to get wasps. And we had talked about wasps earlier. I want to support all of life, but I will say that there are some species of wasp that will go out and actually destroy honeybee hives. So I'm not necessarily as inclined to say, oh, never eradicate those species from your house or your garden. There's quite a few also to be wary of. For instance, the yellow jackets and the white-faced hornets, to be watch and be careful that when you're interacting and talking to your bees, those bees actually want to be talked to and aren't the kind that are going to chase you 100 yards away from where you are, from if that's their territory. So that's that was it. Well, actually, let's open it up to some questions now, if we want. Will that work? You had a question about the white-faced hornet before. What was it?
Thinking about that conversation, it was, we are just describing what we experienced. And that the nest was it wasn't aggressive to us, as was there eating dinner and so on. But we would see it come and go. But then again, we weren't on the roof. It was attached to the eave. So I don't really have a question. We're just sharing that.
Okay. To move on to why I brought this subject up. So the same chemicals that we use often to kill wasps are also toxic to bees. Obviously, they interact on their nervous systems in the same way. So how I recommend dealing with, and how I personally deal with, granted I do have a suit that I tend to wear when I do it, but is to surround the hive with a plastic bag, a garbage bag, typically a heavy-duty garbage bag. And so when you do that, if you get around it, do it at night when they're docile, preferably on a cold night. That's when they're at their least aggressive. And then if you're going to spray it after. Again, wait till it's you cut there's always a little base that attaches to whatever it is. If you cut that base off, holding that bag up, they'll be angry, but they'll fill the bag. And then that's something that can be sprayed or just left out in the sun, and they'll cook over time. But it's a way to keep from introducing the pesticide into the local environment. Because when you do that, I mean, if you do one of the things where you're shooting up into your eaves, you watch that spray can coat the side of the house, can coat your flower beds and so forth, and ultimately it's potentially injurious to other species. I have found that bald-faced hornets tend to be very territorial and will. And they also can sting many times. Now, I don't know if you're aware of this, most people know this, but a honeybee can only sting once. And only the female honeybees have stings. In the hive, a male bee, there's a bit of a difference. The female honeybee, the worker bees are fairly small, and they have a pointed abdomen, and they have eyes on the sides of their heads. The male bees, the eyes meet in the center of their heads, the drones, and they have a longer body, and their abdomen is rounded and kind of fuzzy on the back. And that's where, if they had a sting, it would be. But the sting in the worker bee is a modified ovipositor. It's what would, if she had matured sexually to become a queen, that would have been her egg layer. That is now turned into the sting with the venom sac. When she stings, that sac will come out, and she spends the next few minutes at the end of her life dying. So the bees only sting as a last resort. Not true for the most wasps. Wasps have a retractable stinger and can do it repeatedly. Also, queen bees have that capacity, although almost no one ever gets stung by a queen bee, because once she starts laying eggs in the hive, that's where she's going to spend the rest of her life. However, queen bees will, and very perfectly timed for tonight, in Game of Thrones fashion, the queens have this incredible array of behaviors that they will exhibit when in the hive. So if a queen has started to fail, if she no longer can lay eggs the way she did, the worker bees will decide that they're going to raise a new queen. And this is one of the fascinating things. A queen, once she has her supply of genetic material from her mating flights, will for the rest of her life decide whether or not to fertilize every egg she lays. A fertilized egg will become a worker bee. A unfertilized egg will become a drone. And you'll see, as a beekeeper, you see this pattern emerging. She will lay those fertilized eggs in usually concentric spirals in the center of a comb. And then around the perimeter, she'll lay unfertilized eggs in larger cells that are for drone development. And at any given point in the season, you'll have maybe 10% drones in the hive. Anything more than that is a sign of either a super robust hive or a failing hive. And if you see a ton of drone comb, that's a sign that a hive is failing. But I digress. So if you see that, that she's either hasn't figured it out yet or is at the end of her life, a lot of times what you'll see are these cells that look almost like alien life pods. They come off of the face of the comb and they hang down. Those are queen cells. Now those are decided by the worker bees. The workers take a fertilized egg that's 3 days old and they will transport it into one of these specialized cells and they feed it a diet of royal jelly. And that's all that larva will receive over the course of its life is royal jelly. And that, because of the difference in diet, it will become a fully mature female queen. Typically speaking, there's a process called supersedence that takes place when they're going to replace a queen. Or if a queen becomes injured or is killed on mating flights, they will go and do that procedure. But when you see these cells, they oftentimes will do more than one. And where we get to the Game of Thrones fashion is if a queen emerges from one of those cells, the first one who emerges will go around and that stinger that she almost never uses, she will use on all the other queens before they emerge, and she will take control of the hive. So it is true what Cersei says, in the Game of Thrones, you either win or you die. And it works the same way in the hive once a queen is coordinated. Yes?
Can you tell me about if you plant things that blossom near the hive, like thyme or something like that, right around the hive? And also, could you comment on trees?
Certainly.
Honeybees, like?
Absolutely. Cottonwoods are wonderful, maples. Any of your flowering trees, for the most part, if there's an abundant flower, you're either going to have the nectar source or pollen. For instance, when maple pollen comes out with the beginning of the year, that's one of the great sources. If you go to the Xerxes Society, that's a great place to look for trees. Trees are tough because you have a lengthy growing cycle before you actually have a substantial nectary. Whereas, what I'm encouraging everybody to do is plant to create those little wild spaces in your land, in your gardens, around the area where one of the things great is if you're out pulling rocks, for instance, and you create just small little rock enclosures and have that be something that's set aside. I find it looks. Personally, I think it looks beautiful, and to have those little oases of life, they also become, if you have a rock pile, that can be nesting sites for different kinds of bees. There's mason bees, sweat bees. Those are some of my favorites. They're so cute. The little tiny, kind of green and yellow iridescent often, and they'll hover over your skin. If you've ever seen, those. What are those weird bees? They're sweat bees. What they're doing is they're drinking your sweat. That's what they sustain themselves on. And I always say hi to them when they come by.
But they still pollinate.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, they're
Yeah.
they're like in the sweat.
Well, and they're all part of that. They're all part of that web of life that we're trying to support. That biodiversity, getting them. Bumblebees like to nest underneath things. They're not tree nesters so much. They build burrows. And again, wood, if you're cutting wood, or trees come down. A lot of times, some of these storms we have, trees come down. Rather than just pull it out all and burn it all, if you take some of those, leave a small pile in the woods or along the wood line, that can be a place where the bees can go in and burrow, nest. Various species of predatory wasps, solitary wasps, which I tend to have better relationships with than the large groups of wasps that invade hives and kill things. Those will also set up little nesting sites within those piles of wood. If you just stack them on end, kind of like cordwood, that's a great way to do it. Any other? Yes?
When you say small islands, like we have a very small yard, and I mean, we've got beds, and is it bad to turn the whole bed into wildflower?
Oh, no, I will never try to discourage anybody from planting any wildflower ever. I think it's wonderful to see. Yeah, to have an entire wildflower bed is great. To let it go to seed is also wonderful, because then a little less work, you'll get perennials, and you'll start to see the cycle of what maybe is best suited to that soil. Yeah, if you have a small yard, to create a wild space, even if it is a cultivated wild space, it's still something that you allow to grow year round and to take its natural course. And that's something that animals, birds, insects will be attracted to. And so the idea of the islands is more about predation than it is necessarily about like a planting strategy for production of flowers. It's the idea that if you have large sections, for instance, if you have a large field and you just have one spot of flowers, and the bees have to come out of the trees or from a tree line and cross a large expanse to get to that space, they're open to predation by birds and primarily birds, but and other insects. Whereas if you have those islands where you just think about it, running from spot to spot and finding cover, it's also doesn't stress them as much. They have breaks, so they're not having to fly long distances between refueling, so to speak. That's one of the.
And do they need running water?
Preferably, or standing water is, if it's a pond as well. Those having a bird bath, bird baths are wonderful. I always have a few dishes out in the yard. What I would say is if it's deep enough, to get just put rocks in it so you have something protruding above the surface, because a lot of times when a bee gets there, it may be at the end of a flight and it's exhausted. And what it'll do is it'll get to the edge of the water, and if it gets a little wet, if it can't get up onto something, it'll drown. And so that's, I'm a big fan of, it's one of my favorite things to do actually, having a little bottle of sugar water around, and when you see I find it more often with bumblebees than honeybees, but to have just a little bit of sugar water, just a drop, put it on your finger, when you see an exhausted bee laying on the driveway or something like that, if it's still alive, and to give it that little bit of energy and then to see it fly away after, it's like, oh, that was simple. That would work. Yes?
So, we moved from New York City, bought this house, didn't know a lot about gardens and whatever. There were 2 wasps' nests.
Uh-huh.
And so we called an exterminator. I called it because I was allergic to wasps.
Uh-huh.
And they sprayed poison on the house. So what do we do? That was last year. We won't do it again. But what do we do do we need to clean where we sprayed that poison?
It wouldn't hurt. It really wouldn't hurt to get a power washer and to spray that down. Depending, you don't want to take the paint off, but just to spray down the outside. To be conscious. I mean, the first real step is to be conscious of the use of pesticides. And there are situations where they need to be used, but to use them as minimally invasively as possible. There was a thing I saw once. I love the analogies. It's somebody said, will not recycling this one little plastic water bottle really damage the environment? Said 100 million people yesterday. It's that idea that it's all those little efforts that we are doing locally within our own space by creating, if you create a little island, and you create a little island, and you create a little island, that those bees then, your neighbors, they're gonna know, they're gonna create their route, and they're gonna follow that path. And once they have those little spaces where they're not flying long distances just to get to a pollen source or a nectar source, that creates strength in the hive. And the stronger a hive, the more resistant it is to disease, to mites, to bacterial infections, to predators, even to bears. Although for that, mostly need electric fences. But I've become quite good at installing those now. Yes.
At dusk, there came a turning. There was a moment you could feel beauty rising on the breeze, the shapes the stone, and I would ride